for a missing 2 hours of time. In the days and months to follow, they were plagued by physical problems and nightmares associated with suppressed memories of an alien abduction. November 5th, 1975, 6 men reported that their colleague disappeared when he approached a UFO. 5 days later, he was found alone, dehydrated, and mentally disturbed. He recounted experiences of being examined by strange creatures. Reported cases of abductions like these number in the thousands, and the effects are always the same. Whether damage to plants and animals, psychological injury, and even physical death, trauma of some kind always results from close encounters with our UFOs. But another puzzling component is the ability of UFO craft to defy the laws of physics. Objects have been reported to make sharp right-angle turns at high speeds. They have also been observed to suddenly change form, disintegrate, and then reappear, among other strange phenomena. Appeals to physical explanations, such as government cover-ups and the existence of extraterrestrials, seem to provide an inadequate solution. How can these rUFOs be both real in light of the trauma they inflict and non-physical due to the unusual properties they exhibit? In this final episode, we explore the possibility of extra-dimensional beings as the basis for a viable rUFO hypothesis.
Welcome once again to this special edition of Reasons to Believe. This is the final episode in our series in which we've been discussing the rUFO hypothesis. Now, our panel of experts has been developing a theory that best fits the facts surrounding UFOs and offers a unique approach to this difficult problem. I'm your host, Greg Koukl, and I'm joined today by astronomer and minister and UFO investigator, Dr. Hugh Ross. Hugh?
Good to be with you, Greg.
In addition to Dr. Ross, joining us is cult researcher and Christian theologian and philosopher, Ken Samples. Ken?
Hello, Greg.
Good to have you back. Now, both of you, along with Dr. Mark Clark, are co-authors of a book entitled Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, A Rational Christian Look at UFOs and Extraterrestrials. It's published by NAB Press, and our viewers may want to get a hold of that book if they want more information about what we're discussing here in our series. Just to briefly recap what we've covered so far, we began our series by discussing your theory that the vast majority of UFO sightings have an explanation of one kind or another. That is, natural explanation of Venus, sightings of military aircraft, or hallucinations, or hoaxes, or something like that. We dispatched the large majority of those, but still there's a percentage that haven't been explained yet. 1 to 5%, which is a rather large number as it turns out. And we've called these rUFOs, or residual UFOs. Well, gentlemen, is there a common denominator here, or an element which seems to be consistent across the board throughout all of these residual UFO reports that can help us to understand them better? Ken?
Well, there certainly is, Greg. What I call a prerequisite of occultism. Virtually all the people who engage in UFO phenomena and UFO experience frequently have roots in the occult, involved in some kind of mediumship, what is called trans-channeling, seeking esoteric knowledge, trying to predict the future. People sometimes describe even experiencing levitation, poltergeist phenomena, things of that nature. And out of this occult experience comes two other elements that I think are very important. One, a real sense of deception, that these entities, whatever they are very deceptive about their nature. They're deceptive about communicating ideas, and often people are left with harm. They're harmed mentally, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes physically, and almost always spiritually harmed by taking them away from various reality and truth.
Just to take this a little farther, Ken, sometimes these are characterized, we see on TV and in movies and stuff, and and even a testimony from some of these promoting these contacts, that these aliens are really our friends. They're trying to help us. They're trying to take us to the next stage of human evolution. So there's a benevolence that's characterized here. You're saying that really is mistaken.
It's true that there are people who claim a benevolence, that these so-called aliens are here to help humanity take that next step in evolution or to avoid disaster. However, when you begin to look at the residual UFOs, you've cleared away all the others, you begin to see that there is these elements of deception and this occult influence, and that people are harmed. For everyone who says that they're helped by these, there are many who are harmed.
In what way are they harmed?
Sometimes it is severe emotional trauma, psychological trauma. There are accounts of people actually being physically harmed, even killed. And other people go through a very difficult period where they're attempting to recover from this kind of thing. Not to mention what I would call the spiritual negative influences out of this kind of phenomena.
Sometimes the malevolence gets worse as the days follow the experience. I mean, if it was something natural going on, you'd expect the greatest trauma to be at the time of the event. But in many of these residual UFO experiences, it actually gets worse and worse as time goes by. Months later, the trauma is even worse than it was the following day.
So there's this characteristic malevolence when you get down to the rUFO segment, basically, that needs to be accounted for, I guess is what you're saying, and it harms the people, and it actually, instead of improving the circumstances as time goes on, it actually gets worse, as you're saying.
Well, a significant piece of data that supports this is, like, you take my discipline of astronomy. Some of us are outside observing the heavens for 1,000 hours plus a year. If anybody should be seeing UFOs, given that it has some kind of natural explanation, we should be seeing them because we're out there watching most. And UFOs tend to peak at 3 a.m. in the morning. Well, the people are out there watching the sky at 3 a.m. should be seeing these things. Another thing you note is that UFOs are most frequent along remote, lonely roads. Well, that's where astronomers are observing. But it's not the astronomers with the most observing time that are having these rUFO encounters. Rather, it's the astronomers that are the most deeply involved in occult practices that are having these experiences. I noticed that there were men in my peer group who were maybe observing 3 or 4 hours a year. And they were consistently having rUFO experiences, where others of us who were logging 1,500 hours plus per year never had these experiences. Well, in the first group, you had people who were deeply involved or committed to occult activities. In the second group, they were not involved in those activities at all.
I'd like to get some clarification on this, Hugh, because I think a lot of times people hear the word occult and they think of satanic rituals. They think, well, I'm not involved in satanic rituals, so I'm not involved in the occult. Now, Ken gave a couple of examples of occult activity. Can you expand this a little bit more so we can get an idea of what kinds of things people are involved with?
Well, it's what Ken was saying, trying to seek some supernatural knowledge, being able to predict the future or being able to see into
tarot cards, would that be an example?
Tarot cards, astrology, going to a seance, playing with a Ouija board, reading occult literature, or reading material written by fortune tellers and people who claim to be prophets and seers. Having sexual intercourse with a witch or someone who's involved in these activities. These would all be open doors to the occult. And statistically, at least in our studies, people don't have these residual UFO encounters unless they have one or more of these open doors. And the more open doors there are, the more likely they are to have these experiences. I mean, one of the things you see in the literature is that UFOs are prone to revisit people.
And what comes out of that typically, Greg, is that people end up being more involved, becoming drawn to the occult, having a deeper involvement in kind of an occult worldview. And rather than coming
because of their rUFO experience.
Because of this experience. And because of those experiences, they don't come closer to knowing the reality of this phenomenon. at its heart, it becomes even more deceptive. So the closer one is connected to this experience, we see this harm, we see deception, and we see an occult worldview.
Okay, so I asked the question first, is there any common denominator here that ties all of these RUFO experiences